Hi everyone, it's the Catholic CEO Henry Kutarna. Today's topic in the Catholic Business Wisdom series is co-ops, cooperatives. This is a business structure that you would be familiar with because typically it's known mostly across Europe and in North America. It's a model that is different than the corporation or the not-for-profit corporation. The main difference is that in the co-op, you have a one member, one vote scenario. Whereas in the corporate world, as you know, you vote your shares, and therefore he who has a higher percentage of shares basically controls the operation and controls the decision making. So the one member, one vote concept is one of the hallmarks of the co-op. Now the movement started, back in England in a certain period in history when they were looking for alternatives. It has also transferred over to the US and Canada in the sense largely for farmers who originally banded together in the form of co-ops, either buying co-ops or selling co-ops. So for selling grain and for selling harvest and crops, they would band together to do some sort of price protection. It would be like a supply management model, you might say. And certainly for buying co-ops, for buying power, you group together and you can create some buying power by banding together to buy your inputs or your products. So some examples of co-ops would be, let's talk about small co-ops first. The grocery co-ops are famous. A small co-op store, a feed store, a farm supply store, or just a general grocery store. Interestingly, co-op grocery stores have grown, particularly in Canada, to the point where they are very large chains that are very similar to the large chain grocery stores, both in the way physical layout, how they look, how they market, how they advertise. But the difference is that you might have a one member, one vote privilege. So you could be a member of a co-op. You're not an owner or a shareholder in a co-op. The term is you are a member. Further on the small co-op examples, artists and writers often get together to create a co-op. You might see this in certain market in your town or your city where artists will get together and they'll form a co-op. So they'll rent space together, they'll pay expenses together, they'll create a work environment, sort of like a co-location thing that's very fashionable these days with startups and early stage companies. Co-ops also started out as banks. And so you might remember my grandfather, for example, and my dad started a credit union at the parish, and this credit union was really a co-op. It was intended to help recent immigrants to find financing, small dollars, where the banks wouldn't touch them because they had no credit rating yet and they had no history with the bank. So small co-ops would be grocery stores, artists, writers, other musicians, banks, and credit unions. Large co-ops, again, you can look to North America for examples. Large co-ops, oil and gas, for example, big refineries, oil refineries. I'm thinking of a few in Western Canada where they are massive refinery complexes, really, looking just like the ones in the larger corporations that are familiar names to us in oil and gas. There are also large grocery chains, as I mentioned a minute ago. You've got some co-op grocery chains, literally, that are as big as the privately owned. You also have large farming co-ops. They look and feel almost like a corporate farm, but they are largely owned as cooperatives by groups of people that want to band together in that way, both for buying advantages and also for selling advantages. The decision-making structure in a co-op would be similar to that of a corporation. If you saw it, you'd not be surprised. They would have a governing board, a board of directors, which is governed by bylaws and corporate statutes, and there would be unanimous shareholders agreement in the sense that not that an individual shareholder is going to agree to a set of rules, but a document that is really a set of directives to the shareholders about how they're going to do business. I should have said unit holders as to how they're going to do business. There would be advisory boards, all sorts of advisory boards depending on any particular subject matter that they need expertise on, such as marketing, financing, technology, perhaps even food acquisition or customer service, that sort of thing. The management structure of a co-op, once again, resembles these days corporate life. So if you saw a credit union today, form of a bank, or if you saw a grocery co-op or an oil refinery set up, you would notice that the management team is set up the same way. There's a CEO, there are vice presidents, there are directors, general managers, regional managers, store managers, operations managers, and so on. They get their financing in the same way. They go to banks, they take out loans. There's no such thing as an IPO. I've heard of some co-ops that will, an initial public offering, and they'll go out there and start to sort of behave like a private sector company, and they'll go public. This is rare. They will be financed sometimes by private equity, and the point is that co-ops, once you get to a certain size, they will resemble the corporate world in so many ways. The behavior in a co-op, similar to that of the corporate world, there will be political considerations that will be taken into account. The visibility and size will make the co-op behave and adhere to certain social contract positions. They might be subject to rules in the same way that the corporation is, of course. They will lobby. They will have people lobbying them. They will have to have a communication strategy. They will be really an economic unit that's powerful in the economy. And so they will be, in a certain sense, we have free will. I'm not going to say force, but they will be led to behave in much the same way as corporations do. Initially, the advantages of a co-op were banding together for supply, to buy inputs and supplies, to sell together, to at least to allow not price fixing, but certain kind of price stability by withholding supply or timing sales to the market. The prices were always intended to be lower in a co-op because there's no profit. The key thing about a co-op is there are no distributions of profit to shareholders. There are distributions, they used to call them in the earliest days patronage dividends. And so if you were a member of a co-op, remember one member, one vote, but you spent a certain dollar figure at that co-op grocery store or supply store, you would receive a patronage dividend, a kind of in a certain sense, almost resembling a dividend, but called a patronage dividend because it would depend on the amount of money you spent at the co-op. So you'd get a little bit of a rebate. In other words, you got some money back for your purchases in proportion to the dollars that you spent. And so somebody who spent, $10,000, well, they would get a higher patronage dividend than somebody who spent $1,000 at the co-op. There's no wealth creation in a co-op. If the entity is sold, let's say it goes private, goes to the public markets and does an initial public offering on a stock exchange, there's nobody going to prosper from that except the co-op itself and indirectly its members. So there's no private wealth, and so you can see co-ops growing. I'm thinking of particularly grocery store chains or the oil refinery co-ops. I've seen them become so powerful and worth billions of dollars. But the point is, nobody individually owns that. The entity itself is valuable. It's a store of value. It does create employment, income, and it behaves in the economy in a powerful way because it buys services, it buys supplies, it employs people, it pays taxes, it pays for expansions, it borrows money. It's a full participant in the economic system, but it's really a co-op. It's a different kind of structure. So I would say that in history, the co-op movement has slowed down. It's not as essential to people with prosperity and the growing middle class and all of the troubles that we have today, of course, notwithstanding. The co-op movement is a weaker force in the economic system now, except for mostly the smaller co-ops and then the giant co-ops, the larger, the oil refineries, the grocery chains. There's no wealth creation. Can you argue that the prices in a co-op grocery store are lower than, the discount no frills grocery stores? I doubt it. I mean, you can do a survey, a spot survey. You'll find that sure, prices might be lower this weekend or that weekend, or for that particular product or that particular type of service that is provided in the oil and gas industry. If you go to a gas station owned by a co-op chain, a vertically integrated co-op, large oil refinery, oil and gas producing co-op, the gas prices are going to be the same as everything else. You go and look and you can check on your apps. You can see that the pricing honestly is not much different. So the concept of the co-op, I think, it's an older concept. I think it's probably defunct as an entity in the economic system. Aside from the power that it currently has, there are fewer and fewer compelling reasons to form a co-op these days, I would say. In summary, what are the advantages? Well, the advantages are no profit, no individual shareholders controlling. The board of directors really has full control. Members have some say, perhaps at an annual general meeting or through advisory committees or even through direct access to board members. But that's the same as the corporate world. There's nothing different about that. The advantage of a co-op for the economic system, they hire people, they employ people, they buy inputs, but they have to pay the same price as the other large corporations do for their inputs. They have to pay the same wages to people. They don't, particularly when you look at the wage package in a co-op versus that of a corporation, not much different. There's very little difference. Behavior, popular behaviors, or let's say social contract, social enterprise type behaviors, doing the social good. Well, co-ops are subject to the very same pressures that the corporations are, and they're actually, if you look at it objectively, they're no better, they're no worse. They are blending themselves into the corporate structure of North America, very similar ways to that of corporations. They behave the same on their political agendas. They have to be, green, and they have to be politically correct, and they have to follow all the social mores that everybody else does. One could question what the advantage of a co-op is. By the way, in co-op grocery stores, or even in the oil and gas, the refineries and the gas stations, the margins are so slim that they're similar to that of corporations. And so to have an advantage like one member, one vote, or the patronage dividends, or the rebates, let's call them, there's not much difference between that and the behavior of the corporations. Similarly, when it comes to financing co-ops, to grow and expand and build chains and build refineries and build gas stations, they're subject to the same costs and the same financing pressures that the normal economy has. You don't really see, in my opinion, much difference in the co-op behavior at the large scale end. At the small scale end, I will say this: co-ops that are used to help musicians, for example, form a studio, artists to form a co-op or an art studio to jointly, rent space and have a facility and perhaps even become a marketing destination. If you have 12 artists in a building, you're more likely to attract an audience than if you're a single artist operating out of your home or in some location in your town or your city. So I could see the future of co-ops at the lower end being possible, yet the governing issues, the making decisions, plotting strategy, planning, financing, paying the rent, paying the utilities, that's the same pressure that you would find in a small business or a home-based business or a startup as well. Yet I can see an advantage for co-ops because there's no one individual who controls and changes the direction, and the artists might get together and work on a consensus model, or a model of how they will, come together and make decisions that are perhaps more in line philosophically with their approach. That's the advantage of co-ops at the small end of things. So there you go. That's the summary of how the co-op system works in our North American economy today. It's an interesting model, and you might see in your local area certain evidence of it: credit unions, co-ops, gas stations, grocery stores, and perhaps artists, cooperatives, and musicians, and things like that. So that's the story of the co-ops. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Kutarna. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.